McDonald's is the largest restaurant chain in the world, with over 40,000 restaurants spread over 120 countries. By this point, the Golden Arches are an inescapable sight wherever you go. A McDonald's has sold well over 300 billion hamburgers, but the original McDonald Brothers who started the business had their company all but stole them from them because what began as a single drive-in restaurant was soon transformed into a global fast food empire. Because of an unrelenting milkshake machine salesman, and even though it may appear to be a simple burger business from the outside, McDonald's secretly dominates an entirely different industry, completely unrelated to selling fast food. At times, McDonald's is an inspiring story of an entrepreneur defying all the odds and building an empire. This is a crazy story, so sit back and relax. In the early 1900s, the American landscape was undergoing a massive transformation. The Ford Motor Company perfected the mass production of the car, and all across the country, roads were being paved to make way for it. But the introduction of the car did more than change the way Americans travel. It also changed the way they ate in Southern California. Hundreds of drive-in restaurants were popping up and customers loved the experience. You would drive into the parking lot and be greeted by a waitress at your window. A few minutes later, your order would be delivered right there. You didn't even have to get out the car to spice things up. Some restaurants even had waitresses deliver food on roller skates. That was the world that the young Richard and Marie McDonald encountered when they left New Hampshire and moved to California in 1927. But to begin with, the two brothers, Richard and Maurice or Mac, as he was otherwise known, didn't even think about restaurants. They wanted to start a career in the movie business. And so they got jobs, pushing film equipment and handling props on movie sets, saving up with the hope of someday buying their own movie theater. When the Great Depression struck, Richard and Mac carefully watched every penny they earned, and 5 years later, they bought the cheapest theater they could find. Unfortunately, they got what they paid for, and their rundown theater earned them barely enough to survive. So after 5 years of struggling to turn a profit with their theater, the brothers decided it was time to abandon the movie business and pursue something more lucrative. Everywhere they looked, the McDonald brothers saw new drive-in restaurants popping up, and so they figured there has to be money to be made here. Their first restaurant was called McDonald's Barbecue, and originally they sold hot dogs. It was a tough challenge between learning how to work a grill, take in, deliver orders and manage a restaurant staff. They had a lot on their hands, but after 2 hard years of running their restaurant, they were finally ready for something bigger. They set up a new shop in an octagonal building on a parking lot in San Bernardino. It was bigger and a better location and with new items on the menu. On weekends, the new McDonald's Barbecue attracted over 100 cars at a time, and the brothers managed a staff of 20 waitresses while they rushed to make milkshakes and crack hot dogs, ribs, pork sandwiches and burgers. Their cash registers were soon flooded with money. By 1948, the brothers had made enough to live in a mansion, so their competitors were completely stunned when they did the unthinkable and abruptly closed everything down. Richard and Mac at the best restaurant in town. But the current operation was driving them crazy. Firstly, their restaurant had become San Bernardino's local teenage hangout spots and was frequently filled with leather jacket-wearing customers for just as much trouble as they did business. Secondly, it demanded too much of their time and energy in the kitchen. It was extremely stressful to run, and finally finding qualified cooks was hard and expensive. And so from the outside it looked like the McDonald brothers were just giving up. But behind closed doors, they were devising a new plan to completely transform their restaurant. You see, when they looked over their receipts from the last year, the brothers found that 80% of their revenue was generated exclusively from hamburgers. So they went with their gut and cut their menu down to only the essential hamburger, cheeseburger, French fries, milkshakes and Coca-Cola. They then obsessed over reinventing the process of making a hamburger. The brothers traced the outline of their store on their home tennis court and experimented with different layouts, measuring and timing every step carefully. When they were done, every step of the burger-making process had been streamlined. For example, instead of having waitresses to serve customers in their cars, customers would order at the window. Another example was having everyone in the kitchen handle only one task, whether it was working the grill, cooking the fries, packaging the burgers or taking orders. This meant they didn't need skilled workers to produce quality food. And since they only sold burgers now, they could make the food before an order was even placed. Orders got fulfilled in around 15 seconds. They called their new approach the speedy service system, and it produced delicious hamburgers with the same efficiency that Henry Ford's factories produced cars. This kind of assembly line style production was a whole new approach to the restaurant business, but it meant that their restaurant was cleaner, less hectic, and less expensive. It also meant that Richard and Mac could sit back from their office and watch the system work its magic. However, when they reopened McDonald's, the speedy service system did cause some confusion. Customers would sometimes just sit in their car expecting a waiter to come serve them, as the notion of going up to order yourself was totally new. But once everyone realized how the new process worked and that they could get their orders within 15 seconds, they were hooked. The McDonald Brothers had redefined fast food, and word of it was spreading in the industry to their competitors. Surprise! Richard and Mac were happy to spill the system's secrets, and they invited anyone in for a full tour of the kitchen for free. Some of the biggest fast food franchises today, like Burger King and Taco Bell, got their start by shamelessly copying the speedy server system. But by 1954, Richard, a Mac McDonald, was serving more burgers, fries, and milkshakes than they ever dreamed possible. And it wasn't too much work. They lived a simple, rewarding life working together in California. But little did they know everything was about to change from Donald's. It's time to introduce the real protagonist of the McDonald's story, Ray Kroc. Despite coming from very humble beginnings, Ray had a lot of ambition, even as a young kid. His mother was at home giving piano lessons to help out with the finances. She ordered him to help out with regular housework, but she never caught Ray complaining. Instead, Ray took pride in making beds, sweeping the floor, and scrubbing the furniture until it shined. In his spare time, he was taught to play the piano, and with unwavering discipline, he mastered it from an early age. But when he was 15, the United States joined World War I. Henry couldn't bear sitting at home as his fellow countrymen risked their lives. So he lied about his age, managed to get deployed as an ambulance driver for the Red Cross.
By sheer coincidence, he worked right alongside Walt Disney. When Ray returned home, he was still in high school, but he'd had enough. Not 6 months later, his parents couldn't do much to stop him from dropping out. He was determined to make out on his own as a piano player, so he took to the streets to make a living by his talents. When he was 23, went against his parents' wishes again and got married. He understood that this was a big responsibility, though, and he had to take care of his wife, Ethel. So for the first time in his life, he decided to get a stable job. He found it at the Lilly Company, where he sold paper cups. Since he was energetic and charismatic, Ray took naturally to sales. By day, he scoured the state chasing leads, and by night he still played the piano for a radio station. When he finally made it home, he fell into bed exhausted. Ethel did seem to become frustrated by the limited time Ray had to spend with her, though, and when she told Ray she was pregnant, he knew he had to rethink his strategy. The piano got him paid, but it would never be enough to support his family. Instead, he cultivated his ability as a salesman, and luckily for him, that was the right choice because of prohibition. Hotels and bars began serving ice cream since they weren't allowed to sell liquor unless American food service businesses bought paper cups like crazy. Ray even found ways for companies to sell more of the products that used his paper cups. It was when his clients got more revenue and he made more cup sales. But in October 1929, the stock market crashed, unleashing the Great Depression, and the growing economy of the United States came to a sudden stop. Ray's boss at Lyric sat him down in his office and told Ray that he would have to take a pay cut. Ray's face turned red. "I can't accept that," he said. But as Ray heard, his boss explained to him that he didn't have an alternative. Ray said to hell with that and quit Ray on the spot. But when his wife, Ethel, found out, she thought Ray was betraying her and their newborn baby by quitting a stable job when they were in desperate need of money. So Ray went, pleading to get his old job back, but his relationship to his boss was tainted forever. When he returned to his job, one of his customers had invented a new milkshake machine. He called the multi-mixer, allowing for 5 milkshakes to be made at once. When Ray tasted the delicious new milkshakes it made, he saw an opportunity. If Lilly sold the multi-mixer as well, they would automatically sell more paper cups as the products went together perfectly. However, when Ray proposed the idea to his boss, he ridiculed him, saying a Peter Coke company shouldn't be selling milkshake machines. This time Ray had really had enough and quit. Once again, he decided to start his own sales company to sell the multi-mixer instead, and he wasted no time getting started. He was up against a tough economy with a family to feed and had to make money fast. Despite enormous adversities, Ray worked 14-hour days and entertained potential clients late into the night with relentless work ethic and a good product. He was soon driving all around the country, selling thousands of multi-mixes per year, making a decent living. But just as soon as his efforts began to pay off, America was thrust into World War II because of the war. Most factories shifted their focus to supplying the army and multi-mixers weren't getting made anymore. Ray was living his worst nightmare. He was a salesman without a product to survive. He tried selling a bunch of different products until the Allies declared victory in 1945. But once the war ended, the market finally took a positive turn for Ray with the baby boom following the war. Ice creams became all the rage, and so did multi-mixers. Ray began selling them to the biggest franchises in America, such as Dairy Queen. However, this boom also meant that by the 1950s, newer and better products were entering the market and the multi-mixer was falling out of fashion for he didn't find a winning product. Soon he could be in serious financial trouble, but he then noticed something odd in his records. Surely it was a mistake. A tiny restaurant in a remote town 60 miles east of LA had ordered a grand total of 8 multi-mixes. Restaurants rarely bought more than one earth what they need. 8 for Ray's curiosity was too much for him to handle. He had to see for himself. So he took a trip to San Bernardino, California. Ray arrived early in the morning, but at first glance he was not impressed with McDonald's. But very quickly, the parking lot began to get busier and busier. Probably 150 people showed up where Ray paid 15 cents for hamburger and received it almost instantly. He couldn't believe that everything was clean. His burger was delicious. New customers came in every minute and it was a family environment. Ray had never seen anything like it. He introduced himself to the McDonald Brothers and they told him all about the operation. Ray immediately loved their speedy service system and he finally understood why they needed a multi-mixers to operate. This was the most active and most efficient fast food operation he'd seen in his whole career. The brothers also told Ray that they were looking for a franchising agent, someone to build more McDonald's restaurants like this across the country and find operators to run them. The McDonald brothers enjoyed their simple life running this one store, and so they didn't want to do it themselves. But Ray knew that if more McDonald's restaurants like this one did open, they would also need a lot more multi-mixers. So he told the brothers to call him if they found someone to help them with franchising McDonald's. However, for the next week, Ray had trouble sleeping. His imagination ran wild as he was tormented by a vision of McDonald's potential when he sold a multi-mixer. His client used the same one for 10 years. The McDonald's sold hamburgers to thousands of people every day. He knew he somehow had to get involved in this. He called Richard McDonald to ask if they'd found a franchising agent. By now, they hadn't. So Ray asked, "Well, what about me?"
By 1961, the McDonald brothers were out of the way, and so there was nothing stopping Ray from transforming McDonald's into everything he dreamed it could be. Ray wanted an aggressive marketing campaign to cement McDonald's as a household name. But with only 228 stores across the country, most Americans had never even heard of McDonald's. National advertising campaign would be overkill. So the team decided that the best way to promote McDonald's would be locally with the help of their franchisees. It was a gamble, for sure. Selecting the right franchisee to run a restaurant was hard enough, and now they were trusting them with McDonald's image. But Ray's personal preference in franchisees were the young entrepreneurial types, and this became one of McDonald's friends because they were always experimenting with new ideas on how to improve their own restaurants. For example, one operator wanted to use TV advertising to get children interested in his McDonald's. He found a local show called Bozo Circus. When it came time for the Bozo character to promote McDonald's, there was a spectacular salesman at the local McDonald's were soon flooded with kids. When the TV show was canceled, though, they were left without their biggest promoter. But realizing how successful targeting children had been, McDonald's created a new mascot, Ronald McDonald, and they made him a staple of every single McDonald's, along with the whole cast of characters, including the Hamburglar and Grimace. McDonald's would later double down on their strategy further by introducing the Happy Meal, which included a toy and helped get new customers hooked on McDonald's from an early age. It was only in later years that many would come to question the ethics of so aggressively targeting children with their fast foods. But still, individual McDonald's operators like this one were responsible for creating other innovations like the Big Mac, the drive-thru and Playland, and that was the duality of Ray Kroc. What he was very keen to ensure the same consistent quality of experience at every McDonald's. He also encouraged his franchisees to use their own creativity. McDonald's would then choose the best among these local experiments and implement them into the system as a whole, so every other restaurant would benefit too. For many companies, growing larger can often mean less innovation. But for McDonald's, every new operator came with fresh, new ideas to bring to the table. So as more stores began to market themselves across the country, eventually McDonald's did begin to get national attention. At this point, Ray figured the next logical move was taking McDonald's public on the stock market, something no other fast food company had done by 1965, and at their timing was perfect. America was in the thick of one of the most generous bull markets in history. So within weeks of going public, McDonald's stock rose over 60% in value. Ray was now a multi-millionaire, as was Harry, who'd been with Ray pretty much from the start. However, it wasn't all plain sailing for the McDonald's team. In the 60s, it felt McDonald's needed to slow down its aggressive expansion due to fears of an upcoming recession. But their main competitor, Burger King, did the exact opposite. In 1967, Burger King opened over 100 restaurants. By the next year, Burger King was only 100 total restaurants away from surpassing McDonald's, seeing that McDonald's could lose its spot at the top of the fast food industry. Ray demanded they ignore the warnings and resume the expansion campaign immediately. In truth, tensions between Ray and Harry had been starting to grow for a while. They had very different perspectives and often so think very differently. What Harry was technically CEO, Ray was the company president and owned the majority of company stock, so he could replace Harry if he needed to. And after the expansion argument, he nearly did. But luckily it didn't to that, as Harry stepped down from the company voluntarily and took over as CEO himself. But one day, while giving a speech to a group of McDonald's operators, Ray saw that Joan was in the crowd. The woman who'd broken his heart years ago reworked into his speech that he'd now achieved all he ever wanted in life except one thing. The crowd was confused what he meant, but Ray was staring right at Joan as he set out to get her clothes recalled for an after-party and sweets. By the end of the night, Ray and Joan were the only ones left singing old favorites at the piano. Joan told Ray that this time she didn't care what anyone told her. She was getting a divorce from her husband and wanted to marry Ray instead. Now, for 15 years, Ray's entire life had been consumed by McDonald's and they had paid off. But now that he was starting a new marriage with the woman he'd been chasing for years, he wanted to finally think a bit less about the business. For a man who was driven as Ray, this certainly didn't mean he would retire. It just meant he would only think about McDonald's while he slept and up to about 5 p.m. and then keep the evenings reserved for Joan Walsh. Ray would remain the public face of McDonald's for many years. He wanted to name a new driven CEO to lead the company forward, and that responsibility fell to Fred Turner, a young fry cook Ray had picked out and promoted to vice president of operations all those years ago. He'd become like the son Ray never had, and after shadowing Ray for years, Fred was ready to take over as CEO. And it was. Ray had left big shoes to fill. It's fair to say Fred delivered. The first challenge Fred took on was expanding McDonald's globally. None of their competitors had been able to succeed outside of America, he adds. And even Ray had tried to expand McDonald's into the Netherlands, Canada, and the Caribbean. However, their original mistake was trying to adapt their menu to the local culture, and it failed horribly. When Fred tried breaking McDonald's into Japan, he knew he had to take a different approach. Instead of changing the menu, he left intact. But like in America, he left marketing to the locals and it worked. The Japanese people loved the authentic McDonald's experience. In fact, they admired its Japan-like efficiency. The same strategy worked in other countries as well, and McDonald's became one of the main exporters of American culture. Since they recruited locals to operate the restaurants and market the brand, the world received them with open arms. Next on Fred's list was putting expansion high gear. Fred had climbed the ladder at McDonald's all the way from burger flipper to CEO, so he understood the business from all angles. When he was younger, he perfected every aspect of operations, from finding the right temperature to cooked fries into the way employees spoke to customers. Now, though, Fred was optimizing the process of finding a franchisee and opening a new store, and it's fair to say he succeeded with Fred as CEO. There was no escaping McDonald's. New stores were being built across the world faster than even Ray had ever dreamed was possible. By 1974, they were opening more than 500 restaurants every year, and the number only kept growing. Only a few years before Burger King had equaled McDonald's in terms of yearly growth. Fred broke McDonald's into the global market and more than tripled the number of stores. Burger King was that far behind. McDonald's was fast becoming one of the largest and most iconic companies in the world.